and he was given 6 months to live, and no treatment options were available. They looked all over the world, and it was so bad that that was it. So, and Tom died 6 months and 2 weeks later after that diagnosis. So the oncologist knew exactly what they were talking about in terms of time. So, but Tom endured particularly terrible, prolonged and unbearable suffering in the last few weeks of his life. And I don't want this to happen to anybody else. It was just so terrible. And over those 6 months, every so often his pain had become unbearable, and they'd increase the medications, the morphine, etc., and it continued on like that till the last few weeks. About 2.5 weeks before he died, Tom said to us, his family, "I'm in unbearable pain all over my body, and I feel really, really sick, and I'm ready to die, and I want to die." And that option wasn't available to him. I feel that I have to give you some detail, and I won't spend too long, as to how he died, because unless I say it how it was, nothing's going to change. And I couldn't stand the thought of anybody else going through what Tom went through. I'm going to pass around some photos of Tom, which is a progression. Sorry to do this, but there are a lot worse ones than these, but it'll give you some idea. This is for the committee. There's my brother Tom when he was well. Because Tom had a facial cancer, it started to grow inwards and outwards. His jaw became terribly deformed and his face started dropping. He started to drool. This is months before he passed away, drool out of his mouth, and he had terrible, painful mouth ulcers. But Tom, being the person he was, assiduously followed a puree diet for the whole 6 months because his swallowing was so difficult from this cancer. So he had episodes of semi and unconsciousness throughout the 6 months, where he'd lose control of his bowels and we'd find him on the floor of his unit, soiled. This is my older brother, my eldest brother, lying on the floor with his poo all around him because he lost control of his bowels. He became increasingly frightened and unable to do things that gave him pleasure, including watching his beloved Parliamentary Eels. He loved the Rolling Stones and he stopped listening to the Rolling Stones. I honestly thought I'd never see that day. And the worst thing for him was he could no longer use his mobile phone or computer. He was perfectly with it up here, but he couldn't use his hands properly because of the effect of the nerves in his brain. He was moved from respite care to high care. He was given a pump for his medication, and absolutely nothing alleviated his pain and suffering. It went on and on. And finally, his palliative care specialist and a GP came to his independent living unit and said, no, he needs to go to hospital, because they were trying everything to alleviate his suffering and nothing worked. So he ended up in hospital in his last week. And we thought the worst of it was at the independent living unit before he was transferred. We thought, thank heavens, he's being taken to a hospital and the suffering won't be so bad. Well, let me tell you, it was a whole lot worse in that final week. He groaned, he screamed, he moaned. He had my sister in our arms. This went on day and night, day after day, where he would squeeze them to the point where we had dents in our arms, and he only was able to utter 2 words that week. One was help and the other one was inhumane, and that last photo was when he was calling for help. The hospitals ran out of options in terms of trying to control his pain, and even one of the senior nurses said to me how upset they were about it. So they gave him a stress ball to bite down on while all this was going on day and night, day after day, night after night, and he ripped it apart with his teeth in about 5 seconds. So that's the level we were at. I just can't allow it to go on. I want the day to come where I know nobody else will go through that sort of suffering. If New South Wales had had the VAD legislation when Tom received his devastating diagnosis, he would have fitted squarely into that legislation. He would have at least had the comfort of knowing that sometime over that 6 months, if he'd needed to pass away with assistance, he could have. We couldn't give him that comfort. Neither we nor his doctors could give him that comfort. More importantly, Tom would have had to endure the extreme and relentless pain, pressure, discomfort and anxiety that he went through all that time.